Welcome to another episode from A to B. I'm Shim. I'm a senior strategist at Spiro, and I'm super excited to be talking to Kenya, who is a PM at Microsoft. You're a PM, and that's kind of one of your jobs. But you come from that background of experimentation, which ultimately yields you a net benefit because you understand it.
I'll definitely say, coming from the career path that I did, my perspective is different because something as simple as the question of what's the business value of this feature, of this change? My first thought is, all right, what was the impact of your experiments? What was the results of your analyses? Like where'd you land on that? And that makes it so much easier to quantify the value of the feature. What I'm starting to see with those that I work with who don't have that background, or are kind of repelling the experimentation push, they're struggling a bit with that question, which is directly correlated to prioritization. So how do you even get your things in that you think are super important, whether you think they're important or not? Everybody else doesn't know how to quantify that, so they're kind of relying on you. And so I see them struggling with that. Whereas I'm just like, all right, cool. I know how to go get that answer and not stay up all night and make like brainstorm web things, like trying to figure it out.
What are the personality traits that make an experimentation person good? Or I guess, what are traits that makes an experimentation person not good?
I like to think of experimenters in two buckets. I know everything exists on the spectrum, but we're going to, for simplicity, two buckets. You have your scientific mathematical side of the brain of the experimenter. And then you have the strategist, the very fluid, can pull in multiple things that are happening and make things theoretically make sense. Those are two very different, strong skill sets. One doesn't have to be strong in both,
Mhm.
but both need to exist in your program. What does not make a good experimenter is someone who's not willing to ask why the numbers look the way they do. I think that that's what makes a better experimenter is that you not only know how to do it, that's one thing. You can get a whole lot of people who know how to execute an experiment, how to plug in the numbers and get an answer. But someone who could take it a step further and tell that story and really understand the next steps. Like, all right, whether this won or lost in your eyes, knowing that next step is a lot more difficult than just like looking at what number came out.
Ultimately, that's down to the curiosity aspect or like the learning aspect. Like they're just being data driven. Like, is that just the ultimate like personality trait?
Now that's definitely on a spectrum of, do you like to know and understand the data? Do you know how to get the data? Do you know where it comes from? And like
Yeah.
being data driven from my perspective means that you in and out understand that data, where it comes from, why it's captured the way it is, and you know its strengths and weaknesses. So I'm getting this variable, I'm getting this number, but I know that it falls weak once it passes a certain point in the customer cycle. So I might have some integrity issues. So it's not just like, oh, I love seeing lots of numbers and colors and visualizations. I get a lot of those. And I'm like, cool. Why do you need this metric? They can't tell me. They just threw it on there because they thought it makes sense. Honestly, I think that's the biggest downfall of most programs. When they put a number on it, we want the experimentation team to generate X million dollars this year. I mean, what does that mean? Like X million is saving you from making a really bad decision, or X million, as in like I saved your team from executing that and that times X amount of days and people. Like there's, to your point, it's like we are here to be agnostic of the platform of whatever it is. We're here just to research and give you some direction.
What are some green flags or potentially red flags for hiring within experimentation?
I'll start with the good stuff first. The green flags are always, some of my favorite questions are, run me through the last, or maybe not even the last, but one of your favorite experiments and the results. That alone can be a very open, extended question for someone to be very straightforward and concise. So, like, yeah, I take this template, I plug in this number, and it spits out these things. I'm like, all right, cool. I now know that you are capable of following directions or following a guide. All right. And then my next question is usually, so for those calculations, do you tweak those according to the test? If they're like, oh, well, they're already there, that kind of gives me an idea that you don't really understand the calculations that go behind it and maybe how they relate to each other that explains human behavior. Red flags are that you get a lot of those buzzwords of like, yeah, p value and confidence. And I'm like, yeah, but like pull them together and explain to me what was happening with this test. Those are always like red flags if they can't explain the story end to end or how they got there.
What are some like tips or tricks that you maybe have for navigating these murky waters of politics and dealing with maybe people who don't trust experimentation or see you as an enemy?
I like to observe what the overall goal is of the experimentation program. Are we testing and learning, or are we just trying to drive conversion? Which both can exist, but if you don't understand the ratio of that, it's going to make your job significantly harder. So I know we've talked about road mapping and all of that. Whenever you're creating that roadmap and that tree of options and pathways, marking them as this is a nice have in understanding your customer, whereas this test might give you a clear indication as to uh, what strategy to start with or go with. You might be doing like a multi-arm bandit for that because you're just saying, I need to push some things out and get an idea. Whereas you might do an A/B test for completely different color palettes for which is everyone's favorite. Or maybe you're actually testing like a propensity model that's predicting what the behaviors of some of your customers that you are unsure about. That is that can go any direction. So a lot of times if you can understand what that ratio is, it gives you an idea of what percent of effort to put into each lane. So that when you're in those conversations with those organizations that or those teams that are on the fence or don't really want to participate, they're low on resources, they don't have devs who know how to execute it, they don't have access to the platform. There's like an uphill battle for them. Um, Picking maybe the route that would give them some returns might be the best way to kind of insert yourself, get them warmed up to it, and then expose some of the other stuff.
Obviously, you have to play the politics to gain trust and build a program and educate.
Your word, your integrity, your data is everything. That is what makes you trustworthy. If you run an experiment that goes against everything that your program stands for and what you typically do or what you're pushing to do, um, I like to put disclaimers. I like to attach them and permeate it all throughout the test. The setup usually has notes somewhere. The report during speaking on the report, any communications of the test, that's important for your job and for your integrity. As you
Yep.
move forward,
100%.
people know like, is this backed? And that can become part of your program. Is it backed by the experimentation program? No. Okay. And you're persisting. Cool. And I think what people in the politics space, what they want to be able to do is go and run and tell mom and dad that everybody else in the class isn't doing what they want. Mom and dad comes in, do it. And everyone's like, all right, fine.
Yeah.
They want to be able to do that, but they don't want the consequences that come with if they're wrong.
Like,
And so if you're gonna, hold like put my arm behind my back and make me do this, all right, well then I'll make sure that it's not to be like some bad blood or anything like that. Like there's even a healthy way of doing that. It's like, all right,
accountability,
put a
right?
disclaimer that this how we feel, like in the sizing, this is what was observed. And halfway through when we check in on it, if it is trending in the way that we predicted, what would you like to do? If they're like, all right, if it is, then pull the plug. And that's how you also keep the politics part from completely obliterating your program because you don't want a political war. We can't afford to get really worked up about anything, really. We have to be able to move on. We have to be capable of being wrong, embarrassed, everything. Take accountability immediately. We've all been in a situation where we've reported on numbers and look back and be like, oh no, that's not what I wanted to report on. And so we truly are the epitome of open and flexible and able to adapt quickly.
Thank you so much, Kenya. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.